Hello, welcome back to teleSUR English. We now go live to the UN as the 77th General Assembly takes place. Now let's listen to the President of Zambia.
Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, first we congratulate you, Mr. President, on your election as the seventh President of the UN General Assembly. With your vast experience, we're confident that you will successfully provide the required leadership during your tenure as President of the General Assembly. We pay tribute, of course, in the same manner to Mr. Abdallah Shahid for his unwavering dedication and good stewardship during the 76th session of the General Assembly. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, we meet here at a very difficult time. A time when global challenges have not only multiplied, but have become more complex. Such challenges include the COVID-19 pandemic, the climate change, the war in Ukraine, and the associated effects of the supply chain disruptions, food insecurity around the world, the high commodity and energy prices, as well as the overall high cost of living, which have cast a dark shadow on the attainment of the SDGs on our continent. The risk and the world. The risk of reversal in the hard-won developmental gains is ever so real. COVID-19 unmasked the global inequalities which stretch well beyond income and political boundaries, as evidenced through the varied access to vaccines. The risk of further inequality is also real, especially for us developing countries which have inadequate capacity to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change, despite our insignificant carbon footprint. Sadly so. This is truly a defining moment of our time, where collective efforts must be channeled to address the numerous challenges that we face. Mr. President, it is why Zambia welcomes the challenge on building our common agenda and endorse the call to convene the summit for the future. We call for the attainment of a pact for the future that underwrites a new form of multilateralism in our world, one where major challenges are faced together in solidarity within a context of revitalized international order that is rules-based, number one, number two, fair and inclusive, number three, with the United Nations at the center of it all. As a country with the 2/3 of our population below the age of 25, the outlook on the future and emphasis on intergenerational equity is so important to us. Our government seeks to harness this democratic dividend by investing in its youthful population and energetic members of our population for a better future. We therefore support the establishment of the UN Youth Office at the UN here. This should encourage meaningful youth engagement in diverse ways, such as in political representation, access to lifelong skills training and education, support to youth innovation, and indeed entrepreneurship, decision-making, and all the spheres of life, including climate change and environmental protection. Mr. President, in spite of the steady progress made towards curbing the COVID-19 pandemic, we still need to remain vigilant to guard against the possibility of its resurgence. We have all experienced the negative impact of the pandemic, particularly the loss of millions of our loved ones, lives across the world, disruption in social-economic activities. As the world continues to recover from this pandemic, it is therefore necessary to find lasting solutions, including investment in resilient health systems that will respond to future pandemics of the likes that we have witnessed with the COVID-19, just amongst others. This entails the establishment of a versatile international public health regime that will be devoid of hoarding vaccines and related technologies to guarantee rapid deployment of supplies, indeed from a global reserve to tackle future pandemics. Mr. President, the re-emergence of polio in our world is of great concern.
It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet.
This is in addition to ongoing activities to fight other vaccine-preventable diseases such as what? Measles, as well as to strengthen our routine immunization and maintain essential health services for maternal and child health. As the Globe Cholera Control Champion, and many thanks to the WHO who gave us this opportunity to serve in this role, our fight against cholera must continue with vigor, relentlessly with vigor. We also need to remain alert to any possible outbreaks of monkeypox, Ebola virus, and indeed other threats in our world. The international community must work together to address the growing threat to environmental, human, and animal health resulting from antimicrobial resistance, commonly referred to as drug resistance. Drug resistance, bacterial infections to bacterial infections continue to cause millions of deaths where, for example, in particular, sub-Saharan Africa has the greatest burden of resistance bacterial infections, accounting for a greater proportion of deaths in our regions. This calls for greater control systems in access to antimicrobial medicines for both human and animal use. I shall now focus on other areas of interest. Economic performance. Mr. President, the Ukraine crisis has hampered the recovery that was slowly taking hold, particularly in the developing world, where large sections of our society widen by the day. With the attainment of the SDGs off track, countries must intensify national consultative processes and stakeholder engagements and renew commitments to poverty reduction, tackle energy poverty, support debt restructuring, and enhance access to concessional finance, very important to our own development agendas in our individual countries. On our part, we hereby indicate this, in this regard, our intention to present our second voluntary national review in July 2023 to highlight Zambia's progress towards sustainable development goals, achievement of. Despite the challenges in the external environment, we are resolved to rebuild the Zambian economy, and this resolve remains strong ever before. Our economic recovery is on track, Mr. President, evidenced by the positive growth indicators and stabilization of key macro variables such as what? Interest rate regime, indeed, exchange rate market stability, inflation, which we have been able to pull down from 25% to well under 9.8% in just 1 year of being in office. Mr. President, Zambia is on a path of growth from the economic contraction that we experienced in the past, which was somewhere in the region of -2%, and to GDP estimated now just under a year to grow at about 3%. When you add -2 and 3% growth, it means we've grown by about 5% in the last 12 months. This is something that has been difficult to achieve, but with a lot of hard work, we've been able to do it. But we want to do more. Effectively, in terms of social economic benefits, our commitment to providing equal opportunities, especially for the young people, has been demonstrated by the introduction of free primary and secondary education, as we believe that education is the best equalizer. Education is the best investment. Education is the best inheritance without doubt. Consistent with our pledge to invest in human capital, we have recruited over 30,000 teachers, 11,000 health workers in 2022 alone. We are decentralizing, Mr. President, our service delivery and have increased the allocation of Constituency Development Fund by over 1,000 percentage points in our first budget in office. Just the beginning. Expenditure of these funds at community level is meant to ensure inclusive and sustainable economic growth that will support SME development and employment creation across all our 10 provinces, 156 constituencies in our country. I'm pleased to note that we have reached, in principle, agreement with our creditors under the common framework to restructure the national debt which we inherited, and have effectively concluded an IMF deal based on our more important homegrown economic transformation plan. We say many thanks to the International Monetary Fund, to the World Bank, and basically the UN system and other cooperating partners for your support. Climate change. Mr. President, the adverse effects of climate change have continued to ravage our planet. In addressing the emerging global crisis on climate change, allow me to cite a situation in Zambia where recently one half of our country experienced total crop failure due to extreme drought, and another half of our country experienced floods in one season. This is obviously not normal. Climate change, negative effects. Such extreme weather events are a timely reminder of the grave consequences of climate change. We therefore need robust solutions and cohesion in our approach at the global and regional levels to address effects of climate change, without doubt. As chair of the African Group of Negotiators on Climate Change, Mr. President, Zambia calls for enhanced global efforts in addressing climate change, which should include increased financial support for countries with limited resources to mitigate, indeed, to adapt to the effects of and negative climate change issues. Zambia has mainstreamed the green growth and climate change, proofing it in the current National Development Plan, which has articulated broad policy measures on transitioning Zambia into a climate resilient and inclusive green economy over time. 3, gender. Mr. President, Zambia has continued to build on the efforts of attaining gender equality and inclusivity in various sectors of our society. Based on empirical evidence, women empowerment and poverty alleviation are positively correlated, I must say. It is therefore imperative that we dedicate corresponding efforts to ensure that gender disparities are curtailed at all levels. Mr. President, Zambia, under our national gender policy, has been implementing affirmative action in favor of women and girls to ensure that their full potential is realized not once but all times. Ending child marriage. Mr. President, to complement these measures, Zambia is championing the campaign to end child marriage in Africa and, of course, in the world. In the same vein, we are proud to inform this Assembly that this morning, Zambia, Canada, and other cooperating partners held a side event to galvanize support and review commitment from the international community towards ending child early forced marriages. With the assurances made during this event, we are hopeful that we shall be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal of Gender Equality, Target 5.3 in our programming that aims at eliminating this harmful practice, without doubt. International peace, security, and stability. Mr. President, the world at large has grappled with growing instability and insecurity within the last year, and the effects have been felt by millions of people around the world as lives and indeed livelihoods have been lost across the world. Zambia believes that without peace and stability, our joint developmental efforts are in vain, totally in vain. As such, we are committed to remain strong advocates of peace and stability in Southern Africa and the entire African continent and the world over. Our guiding principle is that instability, Mr. President, anywhere is instability everywhere. This reminds us that ending war and conflict is not only the responsibility of those that are directly involved in the conflict, but it's a shared obligation of every global citizen and indeed every nation. I mean all of us without exception, Mr. President. We cannot afford to allow instability to derail our programs, noble programs to better the lives of our people. We therefore take this matter seriously and shall continue to actively participate in efforts to restore peace in all the troubled regions of our global village. As the incoming chair of the SADC organ on politics, defense, security cooperation, Zambia prioritizes the restoration of peace and stability in our own country, to start with, and the region. As it is said, Mr. President, charity begins at home. At the continental level, Zambia remains engaged and committed to the efforts of the African Union, the United Nations in promoting peace in various conflict areas around our global world, our global community. Going forward, our UN system should, we argue, Mr. President, tilt more efforts towards prevention of conflicts, which is more cost-effective and palatable, I shall say. Zambia, as a signatory to various disarmament treaties and conventions, remains committed to promoting global peace and security. Mr. President, Zambia joins other governments in expressing particular concern about the ongoing war in Ukraine. As we stand with all those affected, both inside Ukraine and in the neighboring countries, we also take this opportunity to stress the far-reaching negative consequences of this war, particularly on the prices of food across the world, fuel, fertilizer, and other key commodities. War in any part of the world, Mr. President, has a damaging effect on economic activity, which derails our collective fight against poverty and hunger. Mr. President, a few months of war can erase decades of progress. I shall repeat this. A few months of war can erase decades of progress. And I think we need to take note of this. We therefore categorically condemn war anyway, and we continue to urge all parties involved to pursue diplomatic solutions to conflict resolution. Let me repeat, our UN, and I want to emphasize this, our UN should continue with its peace efforts in this particular conflict, and your efforts, Mr. President, our collective efforts, are well recognized, and thank you for that. UN reforms. Mr. President, we wish to stress that global ambitions toward peace and security largely depend on the effectiveness of the United Nations Security Council. The inadequacies of the current structure of the Security Council, however, have become increasingly pronounced, with ceding of decision-making on matters of global peace and security to the General Assembly that otherwise would have been its preserve. That's a preserve of the Security Council. But this burden is now pushed to the General Assembly. I think this is not correct. This brings to the fore the need for the long overdue reforms of the UN Security Council. We appreciate the call from President Biden for greater inclusivity in the Security Council. We therefore continue to advance the African common position as espoused in the Ezulwin Consensus and the Seated Declaration to ensure the effectiveness, credibility, and legitimacy of our UN Security Council. In conclusion, Mr. President, we wish to reaffirm Zambia's commitment to the fundamental principles which the United Nations was founded upon, which safeguard our shared future, indeed, of peace, prosperity for all nations, not for some nations, I shall emphasize, but peace and stability and prosperity for all nations. Mr. President, I thank you for your kind attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Zambia for the statement just made.
We were listening to the statements of Hakainde Hichilema, the President of Zambia. Hichilema referred